World War II is remembered for its massive battles, famous generals, and dramatic events that shaped the modern world. But history is not just made by leaders or armies. Behind every headline, there were countless ordinary people who acted with courage, bravery, and determination, people who risked everything for others. Some of these heroes were spies, sending critical messages behind enemy lines. Some were children, small in size but huge in courage. Some were women, defying expectations and fighting on the front lines. Even animals played vital roles in saving lives and carrying vital information. Take, for example, Noor Inayat Khan, a British spy of Indian descent. Noor was trained as a wireless operator and sent into Nazi-occupied France. Every day, she moved through dangerous streets, sending secret messages to the Allies. Her missions were dangerous capture, meant almost certain death. But Noor never hesitated. Even when she was eventually captured by the Gestapo, tortured, and threatened, she refused to betray her comrades. Her courage saved countless lives. And after her death, she was awarded the George Cross, one of Britain's highest honours for heroism. Noor's story is only the beginning. Many heroes were not adults. Some were children who acted with astonishing bravery. Not all heroes wore uniforms or carried weapons. Some were children, small in size but enormous in courage. In occupied countries like Belgium, France, and the Netherlands, children risked their lives to resist the Nazis in ways most adults could hardly imagine. They acted as messengers, delivering secret letters between resistance groups. They smuggled food, medicine, and supplies to families in hiding. Sometimes, they guided soldiers or escaped prisoners through forests, alleys, and secret paths. The smallest misstep could mean capture, torture, or death. Yet these children moved through danger with remarkable bravery, driven not by recognition, but by the desire to help others survive. One of the most remarkable stories comes from a boy in Belgium who, at just 12 years old, helped relay messages between the local resistance and Allied forces. Despite the constant threat of discovery, he carried messages in his school bag every day, pretending they were homework. His actions saved lives and contributed to the larger efforts of resistance networks across Europe. Children like him remind us that heroism is not determined by age. Even the youngest among us can make a difference in the darkest times, and sometimes their courage shines even brighter because it is unexpected. While humans carried the weight of war on their shoulders, animals also played critical roles, often risking their lives in ways most people would never imagine. Dogs, pigeons, horses, and even elephants became unsung heroes, performing tasks that saved countless lives on the front lines. War dogs were trained to detect mines, warn soldiers of danger, and carry messages across dangerous terrain. They moved through battlefields alongside their human companions, often facing explosions, gunfire, and harsh conditions. Their loyalty and bravery were unmatched, and many soldiers credited their lives to the faithful animals who never abandoned them. Pigeons were another vital part of wartime communication. Before modern technology, carrier pigeons were sometimes the only way to send messages from behind enemy lines. These birds flew through storms, over enemy troops, and across miles of dangerous territory to deliver vital intelligence that could turn the tide of a battle. Even larger animals contributed. Horses, mules, and elephants carried heavy supplies over treacherous terrain where vehicles could not go. Without them, entire operations would have slowed or failed. One remarkable story comes from a British war dog named Rip, who was credited with saving dozens of lives by alerting soldiers to incoming danger and finding wounded comrades. Rip and animals like him showed that courage and loyalty are not limited to humans, and that every member of the war effort, no matter their species, played a role in survival and victory. Women played some of the most critical and courageous roles in World War II. Even though history often overlooks their contributions, they fought, they healed, they spied, they kept armies supplied, and many risked their lives behind enemy lines. Their bravery proved that heroism has no gender. Many women served as snipers, pilots, engineers, medics, and members of resistance movements. One of the most famous was Lyudmila Pavlichenko, a Soviet sniper whose skill on the battlefield made her one of the deadliest snipers in history. With over 300 confirmed kills, she became a symbol of strength and resilience, showing that determination can be stronger than fear. But women were not only fighters. Countless others worked in secret as agents and resistance leaders. They smuggled documents, helped downed pilots escape, sabotaged enemy operations, and gathered critical intelligence for the Allies. These missions were incredibly dangerous. Capture often meant torture or execution. Yet despite the risks, thousands of women stepped forward because they believed their actions could save lives and help liberate their countries. Some served as medics on the front lines, running into active fire to rescue wounded soldiers. Others worked in underground networks, creating false identities, hiding families, and risking their own lives to protect strangers. Their courage was quiet but powerful, and without their sacrifices, many key operations of the war would not have succeeded. Women in World War II shattered expectations and proved that bravery isn't defined by strength or rank. It is defined by the choices we make when the world needs us most. Across Europe and beyond, ordinary people who had never held a weapon became partisans, underground fighters who resisted the Axis powers from the shadows. They had no uniforms, no steady supply lines, and no formal training. Many were farmers, teachers, factory workers, students, and parents. But when their countries were occupied, they refused to surrender their freedom. Partisans in Yugoslavia, Poland, France, Greece, and the Soviet Union carried out sabotage missions that slowed enemy advances and disrupted supply routes. They blew up railways, derailed trains carrying ammunition, cut communication lines, and ambushed enemy patrols. These operations were small compared to large battles, but their impact was enormous. A single destroyed bridge could delay enemy reinforcements 4 days. A sabotage train could stop an entire offensive. In Poland, the underground resistance, known as the Home Army, became one of the largest and most organized partisan movements in Europe. They risked execution every day, yet they continued to fight, spreading information, protecting civilians, and preparing uprisings. In France, the resistance played a crucial role in helping Allied soldiers during and after D-Day. They gathered intelligence, hid paratroopers, and attacked enemy convoys. Many of these fighters were young men and women who decided that doing nothing was not an option. One striking example comes from Yugoslavia, where partisan groups hid deep in forests and mountains, fighting with minimal resources. Despite facing overwhelming odds, they disrupted enemy operations so effectively that they became a major threat to the occupying forces. These fighters proved that resistance isn't only about military strength. It's about courage, unity, and the belief that a nation's spirit cannot be conquered. Their defiance showed the world that even under occupation, hope could survive. As the war dragged into its most desperate years, countless individuals continued to fight in the shadows. People whose names never reached the history books, yet whose actions shaped the fate of nations. In 1943, deep behind enemy lines, local resistance networks were growing bolder. They had no uniforms, no official ranks, and no guarantee of survival. Their weapons were old rifles, stolen explosives, and sheer determination. One of these groups consisted of farmers, teachers, mechanics, and ordinary citizens who refused to surrender their homeland. They operated at night, moving like ghosts through forests and ruined streets. Every mission was a gamble. Sabotage railways, intercept supplies, gather intelligence, and guide stranded Allied pilots to safety. They knew the risk. Capture meant torture or execution. Still, they continued. Among them was a schoolteacher who memorized enemy codes during the day and transmitted them to Allied command at night using a hidden radio. A young mechanic carefully dismantled enemy trucks, making them appear functional while ensuring they would fail at the worst possible moment. A mother of 3 sheltered resistance fighters in her basement, pretending to host ordinary family dinners whenever patrols passed by. These people were never trained for war. But war demanded more than soldiers. It demanded courage from the unlikeliest heroes. Their efforts slowed enemy movements, disrupted supply lines, and saved thousands of lives. They did not fight for glory. They fought because someone had to stand between their homeland and destruction. They remain unnamed, but history remembers what they stood for. As resistance networks expanded, their operations grew more coordinated and increasingly dangerous. By late 1943, many of these groups were no longer acting alone. They had begun forming secret alliances across borders, creating underground routes that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. One of the most remarkable of these routes was used to rescue Allied pilots who had been shot down behind enemy lines. After parachuting into hostile territory, many pilots were injured, exhausted, and disoriented. Without help, they would have been captured within hours. But the underground networks were watching. Farmers hid pilots in barns under piles of hay. Priests gave them shelter in church basements. Tailors forged identity papers by candlelight, transforming foreign airmen into local workers. Young couriers, some barely 16, guided them from village to village, traveling only at night, memorizing every safe house and every patrol schedule. Each person played a tiny role, but the chain worked only if no one broke. There were moments when the entire system nearly collapsed. A single informant, a careless whisper, or a misplaced document could destroy everything. Yet despite the constant danger, the network endured. In total, thousands of downed pilots were guided back to Allied territory, saved not by armies, but by ordinary civilians acting with extraordinary bravery. They asked for nothing in return. Many never learned the names of the men they saved. They simply believed that helping a stranger in need was worth risking their own lives. Their quiet heroism became one of the war's most astonishing achievements. And even decades later, many of these acts remain known only through fragments of old diaries, coded messages, and grateful letters that never reached their intended recipients. They were invisible soldiers, but without them, countless others would never have made it home. While underground networks worked to guide pilots to safety, another group of hidden heroes fought a different kind of battle, one of information, secrecy, and silence. These were the civilians who became unexpected code carriers, message runners, and intelligence collectors, often without ever touching a weapon. Many of them lived in occupied cities where enemy officers walked the streets daily. They blended into the background: waiters, cleaners, shopkeepers, clerks, people the enemy never bothered to notice. Yet these invisible citizens became the eyes and ears of the resistance. A waitress memorized conversations between officers as she served them dinner, repeating every detail to her contact on her way home. A postal worker quietly copied military letters before sending them out, gathering valuable intelligence hidden between harmless-looking lines. A railway clerk monitored the movement of supply trains, their schedules, and their cargo, passing the information to resistance fighters who used it to plan sabotage missions. They never wrote anything down. They never met in large groups. They lived double lives where a single raised eyebrow from the wrong person could mean death. One of the greatest dangers they faced was routine. The enemy grew suspicious of patterns, so these operatives had to improvise constantly. Messages were delivered inside loaves of bread, hidden in coat buttons, or stitched into the lining of everyday clothing. Even children unknowingly carried crucial information by delivering what looked like simple school assignments or grocery lists. Despite their caution, many of these quiet heroes were eventually caught. Some disappeared without a trace. Others held their silence even under torture, protecting the people and information that could save thousands of lives. They fought the war through whispers, gestures, and hidden notes. Their battlefield was the ordinary world, and their courage proved that sometimes the smallest actions shape the largest outcomes. As the war intensified, acts of heroism were not limited to spies, couriers, or resistance fighters. Some of the most remarkable courage came from people trapped in the darkest corners of occupied territories, families who sheltered victims of persecution, often at the cost of their own safety. These were ordinary people with no political power, no weapons, and no protection. Yet they chose compassion over survival. A retired couple hid a young boy in their attic for 2 years, pretending to live alone while teaching him to stay silent whenever footsteps approached. A shop owner created a secret room behind a false wall, letting entire families hide there during raids. A train conductor altered passenger lists to help those fleeing escape detection, risking immediate execution if discovered. Every day was a test. Every knock on the door could be the last. Many of these protectors had nothing themselves, no steady income, limited food, and constant pressure from occupying forces. Still, they shared whatever they had, sometimes splitting their rations into impossibly small portions, just to feed one more hungry person. Some of the people they hid were children too young to understand the danger. Children who believed they were simply visiting relatives or playing a long game of hide and seek. These protectors became their guardians, teaching them songs, stories, and lessons to keep their minds away from the horrors outside. What makes their courage extraordinary is that they gained nothing from it. There was no reward, no promise of rescue, and no guarantee that anyone would ever know what they did. Many of their names remain lost, buried in forgotten letters or whispered memories. But the lives they saved went on to shape new generations, families that exist today, only because of these silent acts of humanity. In a time defined by cruelty and fear, these hidden guardians chose kindness, and that choice changed the world more than they ever realized. Alongside the courageous civilians who hid families and fugitives, there were countless medical heroes, doctors, nurses, and medics who risked their lives every day to save others. Their battlefield was not only the front lines, but also the hospitals, camps, and hidden clinics where danger was constant and resources were scarce. Field medics often worked under fire, tending to wounded soldiers while artillery shells exploded nearby. They carried the injured to safety, stitched wounds with whatever materials they could find, and kept soldiers alive long enough to return to battle. Many medics were young women, barely old enough to vote, yet facing horrors that would challenge even the strongest adults. In concentration camps, medics and nurses performed acts of courage that defied imagination. They treated prisoners in secret, hiding medicines from guards and sharing whatever scraps of care they could provide. Some kept detailed records of the sick and wounded, risking execution to ensure the truth of what was happening would survive. Others smuggled food and clothing or comforted the dying, offering humanity in a place designed to erase it. Even in hospitals behind the front lines, medical staff endured constant shortages. Surgeries were performed with minimal anesthesia. Bandages were reused. Every day required creativity, precision, and immense courage. And yet, despite exhaustion and fear, they continued. These heroes were often overlooked in the grand narratives of war. They did not march in parades or receive medals immediately, but their work saved thousands of live soldiers, civilians, and children alike. Without their dedication, countless stories of survival would never have been written. Their courage reminds us that heroism is not only about fighting, it is also about saving, protecting, and persevering, even when hope seems impossible. Beyond spies, medics, and resistance fighters, there were ordinary citizens who performed small, yet extraordinary acts of courage every single day. These were people who quietly defied oppression, helped strangers, and resisted injustice in ways that never made headlines. Some forged documents to save lives, creating false identity papers for those being hunted. Others smuggled food, clothing, and medicine to people trapped in ghettos or hiding in forests. Simple acts, like leaving a loaf of bread at a secret location or delivering a message under the noses of enemy patrols, could mean the difference between life and death. One remarkable story comes from a factory worker in Germany who, despite living under the constant scrutiny of the Gestapo, helped Jewish families escape by passing them along a carefully planned network. Each successful escape was a risk. Each failure could result in imprisonment or execution. Yet he continued, quietly and without recognition, because he could not stand by while others suffered. Children, too, played vital roles in these acts of defiance. Some delivered messages or small packages. Some acted as lookouts, warning adults when soldiers approached. Their courage often went unnoticed, yet it was essential to the survival of countless lives. Even in the smallest towns and villages, acts of bravery rippled outward. Every person who chose compassion over fear, every individual who chose action over inaction, helped create a web of resistance strong enough to make a difference. The war was fought not only on the battlefield, but also in the hearts of those who refused to let evil prevail. These unsung heroes remind us that courage is not always grand or public. Often, it is quiet, persistent, and unseen, but its effects can echo for generations. In addition to ordinary citizens, there were individuals whose bravery took the form of extraordinary leadership in secret. They were people who organized rescue missions, coordinated underground networks, and risked everything to protect communities at the very edge of annihilation. One such hero was Irena Sendler, a Polish social worker. She smuggled hundreds of Jewish children out of the Warsaw Ghetto, providing them with false identity documents and placing them with safe families or orphanages. Irena knew that if she were caught, she would be executed. Yet she continued her work, driven by a belief that saving even one life was worth the ultimate risk. Her courage inspired others. Teachers, nurses, and neighbors joined her efforts, forming a network of silent protectors who hid children, provided food, and kept records so families could be reunited after the war. Every child saved represented a defiance of tyranny, a victory for humanity amidst overwhelming darkness. Other heroes acted in similar ways, often unknown to the world. Clergy who opened church basements to hiding families, shopkeepers who smuggled medicine, and entire neighborhoods that silently resisted oppressive orders all played a role in preserving life. Their efforts were quiet, hidden in plain sight, yet they created ripples of survival that would continue for generations. What makes these acts so extraordinary is not just the risk, but the moral courage required. They were ordinary people, not soldiers or generals, yet they stood up to the greatest evil of their time, often knowing that their actions might never be acknowledged. History may not have recorded every name, but their courage endures in the lives they saved, in the generations that followed, and in the example they set for all who would face impossible choices. In the midst of war's chaos, there were also countless individuals who risked their lives simply by choosing to act with decency and humanity. These were people who refused to abandon neighbors, friends, or strangers, even when fear was everywhere and danger was constant. Some were farmers who shared their meager food supplies with starving families, knowing that discovery by occupying forces could cost them everything. Others were teachers who secretly taught children in hidden classrooms, ensuring that knowledge and hope survived even in ghettos and occupied towns. In some cases, courage meant small acts repeated every day. A kind word, a loaf of bread, a hidden coat, a whispered warning. Though these actions may seem modest, together they formed a lifeline that saved lives and maintained the human spirit in a world designed to crush it. One woman, living in a small village in Italy, regularly hid refugees in her home, pretending they were distant relatives. She would feed them, care for them, and guide them safely along escape routes, never seeking recognition or reward. Her bravery, and the bravery of thousands like her, illustrates how ordinary people became extraordinary when the world demanded it. The unsung heroes of World War II remind us that heroism is not always found on the battlefield. It is found in everyday decisions, in the courage to act rightly when the cost is high, and in the determination to protect life and dignity no matter the danger. Even decades later, their stories continue to inspire. They show us that one person, no matter how ordinary, can make a difference when guided by courage. compassion, and an unwavering sense of right. Among the countless acts of bravery, some heroes stood out for their persistence in impossible circumstances. These were individuals who faced not only the threat of violence, but also the constant strain of survival under conditions most of us cannot imagine. In concentration camps, some prisoners became heroes by helping others survive each day. They smuggled food, shared blankets, and carried messages between people separated by barbed wire and guards. Every act of kindness was a defiance of oppression, a way to assert humanity in a place designed to strip it away. Even in cities under siege, ordinary citizens acted with courage. Families shared shelters with strangers. People dug wells, built hidden rooms, and passed vital information through secret networks. They worked tirelessly, often at the risk of their own lives, to protect friends, neighbors, and even strangers. Every small act contributed to a larger effort of survival and resistance. What is remarkable about these heroes is that they never sought recognition. Their bravery was quiet, measured not in medals or speeches, but in the lives they saved and the hope they preserved. Many remained anonymous long after the war ended, yet their courage had an impact that echoed far beyond what any history book could fully capture. These stories remind us that heroism is not always loud or celebrated. It is often quiet, persistent, and deeply human. In the darkest times, ordinary people did extraordinary things simply because it was the right thing to do. As the war drew closer to its final years, the scale of destruction and human suffering grew unimaginable. Yet even in these darkest times, ordinary people continued to perform acts of extraordinary courage. In many towns and cities across Europe, citizens risked their lives to protect others. Some hid entire families from persecution, providing food, shelter, and protection despite constant patrols and the threat of execution. Others created underground clinics or safe houses, tending to the sick and wounded when no official help was available. In the forests of Eastern Europe, partisans continued to fight against overwhelming odds. They sabotaged supply lines, destroyed enemy equipment, and rescued prisoners of war. Though they were often outnumbered and outgunned, their determination slowed enemy advances and gave hope to countless civilians trapped in occupied territories. Even children played their part. Some acted as messengers, carrying vital information between resistance groups. Others helped smuggle food or medicine to those in hiding. Their courage often went unnoticed, yet their contributions were essential to the survival of many. The heroes of World War II were not defined by medals or fame. They were defined by the choices they made when faced with fear, danger, and the overwhelming pressure to give up. Every life saved, every act of defiance, every moment of courage contributed to the larger fight for freedom and humanity. Their legacy reminds us that heroism is not reserved for the powerful or the famous. It is found in the everyday actions of ordinary people who choose to act with courage, compassion, and integrity, even when the cost is high. Alongside the countless civilians and resistance fighters, there were also those whose bravery took the form of extraordinary personal sacrifice. These individuals gave up safety, comfort, and even their own lives to save others or protect vital missions. One example is the network of couriers who carried messages across enemy lines. They were not soldiers, they were teachers, farmers, students, but they understood the importance of their work. Every step they took, every message delivered, could mean life or death for someone else. Some were captured and executed, yet their efforts ensured that critical intelligence reached the Allies. Other heroes worked in the shadows of hospitals and camps. Medics and nurses risked disease, starvation, and bombardment to treat the wounded. They often lacked proper medical supplies, yet they improvised tirelessly, saving lives in conditions that would have broken most people. Their courage was steady, quiet, and relentless. Even among the most ordinary citizens, courage flourished. Shopkeepers, tailors, and factory workers found ways to resist oppression. They hid fugitives, provided food, or sabotaged enemy operations without ever picking up a weapon. Their acts were small in scale but monumental in consequence, creating ripples of hope that stretch far beyond their immediate surroundings. The defining feature of these unsung heroes was not their power or position, but their unwavering commitment to humanity. They chose to act, even when action was dangerous, difficult, and often thankless. They remind us that heroism is not always dramatic or public. Sometimes it is quiet, unseen, and yet profoundly transformative. World War II was defined by battles, strategies, and famous leaders. But behind the headlines, countless ordinary people performed extraordinary acts of courage. They were spies, resistance fighters, medics, children, women, and even animals, unsung heroes whose bravery shaped the course of history. They acted quietly, often without recognition, and many paid the ultimate price for their courage. Some delivered secret messages behind enemy lines. Some hid families from persecution. Some saved wounded soldiers on the battlefield or smuggled food and medicine to those in hiding. Others resisted oppression in small but meaningful ways, refusing to give in to fear or cruelty. What unites all these heroes is the choice they made when faced with impossible circumstances. They chose action over passivity. They chose compassion over indifference. They chose humanity over despair. Their courage was not loud or celebrated in its time, but its impact echoes through generations. The lives they saved, the hope they preserved, and the defiance they embodied remind us that heroism is not limited to the battlefield. It exists wherever ordinary people rise to meet extraordinary challenges. Every small act of bravery, every decision to help another, had the power to change the world. As we remember these unsung heroes, we honor not just their actions, but their spirit. They teach us that, even in the darkest times, ordinary people can shine with extraordinary courage. They show us that hope, compassion, and bravery can survive even amid the horrors of war. Let us carry their legacy forward, not by seeking recognition, but by choosing courage in our own lives, standing up for what is right, and protecting the vulnerable whenever we can. The heroes of World War II were ordinary people, but their deeds were nothing short of extraordinary. Their stories remind us that heroism lives in all of us, waiting for the moment when we choose to act.